Welcome to the Roll Away the Stone for Climate webinar. We're very pleased that you're here. My name is Lori Neal, and I'm a network coordinator with the United Church of Canada, and will be moderating tonight's conversation. I'm very thrilled that so many of you can join, and we're very blessed to have speakers from many parts of the world. So we have Reverend Phyllis Bird, who's joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. We have Patricia, who is joining us from Manila in the Philippines, and we have Jessica Hetherington, who's joining us from Ottawa area. And will be a focus on the global climate crisis we're in, and as people of faith, how we live in this space and how we find inspiration and how we join together in solidarity to work, to be, and to live with respect in creation. So once again, welcome to all of you. I'm going to just share my screen for a moment. And mention that this work of the climate justice is with the church, covers 4 climate pillars: putting our house in order, raising our spirited voices, connecting with the earth, and we're just responding to climate impacts. And tonight we'll be looking at all those areas. And I want to wish each of you a happy Earth Week. This week is Earth Week, being celebrated across Canada and around the world. And particularly in Canada, there's ecumenical collaboration called For the Love of Creation. And together we're able to hold events to pray, learn, and act for climate justice. And tonight's event is one of those many events that are happening across Canada. And you'll see on the images there, you'll see some map of Canada there, which indicates different events that are happening. So I know you may be one of the groups that are organizing something that you're represented on this map, or you may not have yet been able to add yours. Perhaps you're organizing an Earth Sunday or some other event during the week. Please, you're invited to add your event so all of us across the country can see what people are doing for climate justice. So we'd like to begin in a good way to think about where we are and what land we're on. And this is a river that is near where I live. So I'm joining you today near the banks of what I know as Humber River. And it travels from the Oak Ridges Moraine, 126 kilometers into Lake Ontario, and provides sustenance and habitat for all beings in its watershed, both human and non-human. It's been a site of human activity for thousands of years. The river was part of the Carrying Place Trail, traveled by the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunees, and the Wendat, and it was used for fishing, hunting, and harvesting, sustaining life for numerous communities along its banks. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. Now, this was an agreement to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lake. Notice the word sharing and caring. They highlight reciprocal responsibilities with all creation. As people of the United Church of Canada, we also acknowledge the caretaker of the calls to the church that the caretaker of Indigenous Circle made to the last General Council, the General Council in 2018. And I want to share these words with you because in the calls to the church, the Indigenous Church specifically spoke to the earth as our provider, saying the earth is our ground of being. The earth is our mother. The earth is our sustenance. The earth is our Eden. Creator made us from our mother, the earth. Access to this earth has been stolen from us, and others now eat from her provisions. We've been marginalized and separated from our own lands. It was stolen from us by a false doctrine of discovery. We must return to the provisions of the land. This land will sustain us as it has for millennia. So this was part of the calls to the church received at the General Council in 43, General Council 43. So in the face of extraction and capitalism of the earth, viewed solely as a resource, we also acknowledge the indebtedness we have to many land and water defenders, many of whom are indigenous, and the varied biodiversity that remains on this earth very much depends on this resistance and strength and conviction in a different way of viewing and living with the earth. We gather keenly aware of broken covenants and of the harm done when those of us who are non-Indigenous dominate over the earth. We too call to mind and recommit to, we recommit to our new creed and the line to live with respect in creation. As we move into a time to hear, I invite you, if you wish, to name the watershed or the land, the waters, the peoples, the territories where you're gathering from. Either you can put that in the chat or just take a moment to think about what are those spaces, who are the people, what are our commitments, and how can we enter this space very cognizant of that connection. Before we hear from our panelists, I'd like to begin with a short prayer. And hopefully will help us just land in this moment, in this place. My colleague Juan shared about how powerful it was for the astronauts when they were able to see Earth from space and to see it as a whole without borders and just a dramatic moment for the astronauts. And I think as we begin our time now, I'd invite you to locate yourself and to set ourselves and prepare ourselves to hear what we are to hear tonight. So I'd invite you to say the fourth line. The bold part is your part. And maybe Juan, if you wouldn't mind just unmuting at that point and reading the bolded part. And thank you. So God, as we enter this space together with colleagues and friends and church members from across Canada and around the world, open my eyes, Lord. Help me to see your face. Open our eyes, Lord.
Help us to see.
Open my ears, Lord. Help me to hear your voice. Open our ears, Lord. Help us to hear. Oh, sorry. Open my heart, Lord. Help me to love like you. Open our hearts, Lord.
Help us to love. Amen.
Amen. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and introduce our three speakers. So our first speaker this evening is Reverend Phyllis Bird, and she's the director of the Just Communities program of the Organization of African Instituted Churches in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm gonna just spotlight you, Phyllis. Nairobi, Kenya. She works with communities deeply impacted by climate change through drought, cyclones, and floods, destroying crops, livelihoods, housing, and infrastructure. And Phyllis participated recently in the United Nations COP28 and the COP29. And of particular note is that it's very, very early in the morning in Kenya. I believe it's 2 a.m. So a special thank you for Phyllis for joining us so in the wee hours. And we'll hear first from Phyllis. And we've invited each speaker to start with, what is your context? What are you hearing, seeing, noticing and happening around climate change in your community. And each speaker will have about 6 or 7 minutes to do that, and then we'll have a moderated conversation. So welcome, Phyllis.
Thank you. It's very good to be with you this morning, and you in the evening. I look forward to sharing and helping you to understand the context. The Organization of African Instituted Churches, and Lori, if you can just put the first, the PowerPoint up for me. The Organization of African Instituted Churches works across the continent of Africa. And one of the areas, as has been said, is in climate justice, but also in, for me, the many multiplicity issues as it relates to justice across the world. I'd like to share a little bit about climate change in Africa. If you go to the next one, please. Sounding the alarm, the church in West Pokot says that there are blood clots on the lungs of the forest. It's a church that is one of the members of the African Instituted Churches. And when they wanted to describe what was going on in their area, they considered it blood clots on the lungs. The people of West Pokot are mostly pastoralists. And when they have climate problems, whether it be floods or whether it be no rains, then it's a problem because, of course, not only do the people suffer, but also their animals and their fields, and they move around quite a great deal. Let's go to the next slide, please. The haunting image created by Dimi Roho Mafute Pole captures the forest as the lungs and the plant of the planet, their role in carbon absorption. West Pokot, other regions are facing deforestation due to land pressure, illegal logging, shifting agriculture practices, and the irate weather patterns. The cascading effects, loss of biodiversity, soil degradation, water scarcity depicts the community and what they're going through. Next slide, please. As you can see, one of the areas is quite without the desert area, the slide that she just moved away from. But I had the experience of going to Malawi, and I was in a conference in Malawi. We can go to the next one. I was in a conference in Malawi, and in this conference, we were talking about climate change, and it was on the other side of where this picture is showing, the other side of the country. And one of the things that the speaker said was that the slide, and this is in 2023, he said that the cyclones, will continue to come. The cyclones will even get worse. After I left the conference, I went to visit one of our churches, the Holiness Restoration Church. And the pastor picked me up from the airport and took me to the building that had collapsed. This is the church building that had collapsed, and the devastation of the cyclone there. And as we stood actually on the roof of the church and then went inside the church, there was a big crack on the wall. And he said, we're going to have to restore the church, but on partial, this area where it's cracked, we're still worshiping because this is the only place we have to worship. Then from there, he took me to the schools, and he said schools are closed down because people have nowhere to sleep, no place to stay because they've lost their houses, and therefore they're staying in the schools. And because they're staying in the schools, that means the schools had to close down. So that meant education had to stop at that point in time. People have lost everything. The church was gone. And I asked him about rebuilding of the building, and he said, we will have to rebuild. There is no material or no technology to build it in a way that it was cyclone proof. So therefore we'll build it back. But that means the next cyclone comes and it'll be a vicious cycle. It'll start all over again. Next slide, please. This is a church, this is a housing in Tanzania. Because of the floods, the whole house, as you can see in the picture on your, I think it's on your left, um, has fallen down. The farms were also submerged in water. This happened in 2024, where again, the person lost their house, their home. Next slide, please. Next slide, Lori. This is in Busia in Kenya, where once again, you can see where the water reaches again in 2024 in December. So I took you to Southern Africa, and then from there we went to East Africa, Tanzania. Now we're in Kenya, and we see how the floods are affecting it in 2024, where people once again had to move out of their homes, and everything that they had in their house was totally destroyed. Even the farmlands was oversoaked, which meant the prices of the vegetables, agricultural goods, have gone up to the point where people cannot afford it. Next slide, please. I'm taking you to West Africa, where we work. And the person was showing where the water came up, where his hands is, that's where the actual water came up to the house. As you can see the floods that are going by, it looks like it's a river, but in actuality, it's a street where this is in 2022 as well as in 2024 in a flood area in Nigeria. I want to give you a taste of what it looks like and how what people are dealing with. In 2022, we had a major drought in Kenya. One of the things the Organization of African Instituted Churches, we don't really do emergency assistance. But because the drought was so bad, we knew that we had to do something. So we joined hands with the Red Cross and went up to help with some of the food distribution in the area. And these were just some of the people, and you can see the dryness of the area in Turkana. Turkana is in northern Kenya. Is that the last slide, Lori? Yeah. The community coping strategies. In the midst of all the problems, we see that there are community coping strategies. For instance, people in parts of Kenya have started a vertical garden. They have started also planting foods in sacks. Now, these are communities that have very, very small space. So because of that, they're planting in the space that they have available, the sack gardens as well as the vertical gardens. So the resourcefulness of the people in the midst of the tragedy is very important for us to be mindful of. The container garden, just take a container, of that they have, and we have many plastic waste going around. So using the container, the hanging garden, is another way of planting vegetables to assure that the family eats. And this is food that is grown for the family. Next slide. Community coping strategies is also using sunken beds. Sunken beds are key, especially in areas that are dry, because when you're piling soil up, they don't get as much water. But the sunken gardens allow them to get more water. As you can see, that this is not in Nairobi. This is a bigger land where people have bigger space to be able to plant this. We're also encouraging our churches. We have large compounds, and some of the churches have compounds that are big enough to have a garden. So again, this is not one of the church's compounds, but this is an example of what the community is doing to grow their own food and to be able to help them assist themselves. Next slide. Again, thank you for being with us, and thank you for listening to us and getting a little bit small context of what Kenya looks like. I will speak to this woman a little bit later as we go on in the picture and tell you something else about her. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to the time together.
Thank you, Phyllis. I'd like to now introduce our second speaker. It's going to spotlight you, Patricia. Patricia is joining us in the very, very early hours. The beginning of an early workday in Manila, having traveled to the office for a 7 a.m. From her home. So thank you again, Patricia, for joining. Patricia serves as Assistant Program Secretary for Faith, Witness, and Service of the National Council of Churches in the Philippines. She works with farmers, fishers, and students facing and responding to climate-induced storms, heat waves, insecurities, and threats to livelihoods. She prioritizes human rights and people-centered development, and has also attended the United Nations Climate Change Conference recently, and as well has a significant leadership in organizing young people around these significant issues. So welcome, Patricia, and invite you to share a bit with us about the context where you are around climate change.
Thank you, Lori. May I just request some access to share my slides from my other account? That's the NCC Act Alliance account. Yeah, but I could start in telling the situation here in the Philippines with regards to the climate crisis. I think the world has gotten used to hearing news about powerful typhoons and storms in the Philippines. In fact, for the past 20 years, we have recorded the most number of weather-related disasters in the Philippines. So that means that me as a young woman, I grew up my world has been all about disasters. I grew up in an age of disasters. But as someone who witnessed extreme events and climate disasters, 22 typhoons in a year is something that no one will ever get used to. And I want to talk about today that about how climate emergency has already permeated our daily lives. And last year was one of the worst, as we were hit by 6 typhoons in just less than 2 months. Let me just show you some of the pictures just to help you visualize that. So here, I think this was one of the first times or rare times that we have seen, like in a satellite photo, multiple typhoons. We could see here in the snapshot 3 powerful typhoons, but actually in the span of 2 months, we have experienced 6 typhoons. And this was a very significant experience for us because this occurred during the harvest season for our farmers. And of course, with this, we will see income losses for small farmers as they are being repeatedly battered by the typhoons. Not to mention that in the earlier part of the year, they have just survived or been through one of the worst El Nino phenomenon in the Philippines, causing severe drought in their farms. So as they were trying to recover from those kinds from that extreme drought, these typhoons have battered and destroyed their farms just a few weeks shy from harvest. And of course, in our assessments and interviews of our humanitarian response team, we hear firsthand stories about their struggles being buried in debt, in layers and layers of debt, having significant losses for their crops, for their farm inputs, and having nothing to eat. There are even stories that the crops that they have planted, the corn crops that are originally for livestock feeds, those are the ones that they had to salvage after the typhoon, and they are originally for livestock, for pigs, for chickens. They have to save those crops, and feed them to their families so that they would have something to eat. But in days when there are no typhoons, there are no powerful storms, we are still living in the climate crisis. We could still feel this in our everyday lives. In fact, yesterday I was just in an urban poor community conducting disaster risk reduction training with them. And it was just so hot that we had to cut our program short. And then later we found out that it was 47 degrees in Metro Manila, 47 degrees Celsius in Metro Manila yesterday. That's why we had to cut our program short. And this was in an urban poor community, and we had no air conditioning. We had not enough fans, and we could just feel that kind of impact. In that simple moment yesterday, it sounded simple, but this is like the everyday life that we are living, and especially for the urban poor who does not have like a decent home or secured access to electricity. That is the struggle for the Filipinos in Metro Manila. And I resonate with what Reverend Phyllis have mentioned in Kenya, because we are also seeing children here not being able to attend school because their buildings are being used as evacuation centers as well. And we are seeing loss of school days for like 2 weeks to 2 months because of floods and because of evacuated families. Or not even that. Since 2 years ago, we have started seeing suspended classes, cancellation of classes because of extreme heat as well. Now, this is a new experience for us because I didn't grow up with suspended classes because of extreme heat. I grew up with cancellation of classes because of typhoons and floods. But now we are experiencing extreme heat, and our school system is not designed to survive that kind of temperature, this kind of rapidly changing climate context. And for workers, we're seeing income losses, who do their job outdoors, who rely on daily wages whenever there are powerful rains, powerful storms, or scorching heat. And of course, with all this happening, we are witnessing extreme stress and hopelessness in our communities as hunger and poverty worsen along with the climate crisis. And mostly we hear this from the youth, the mental health impacts of the climate crisis. We are experiencing a phenomenon called eco anxiety or climate anxiety, wherein the youth aren't making plans anymore for the future. They are not making bigger dreams for themselves or for their careers. They are not planning to have their families anymore because of this situation that they are seeing, that the world is on fire or that their world is crumbling. That is impacting them as well. But I know that the mental health issue or impact of climate change among the youth is what is mostly talked about. But I want to go back to the farmers and the burden of the climate crisis upon them, because we are not just witnessing income losses, agricultural damages. Our farmers' mental health is also deteriorating. We know them as one of the strongest people in the country, most resilient communities. But our churches are starting to hear stories about hopelessness among the farmers because of their income losses and debts. I'm sorry, but I have to mention this. I wasn't able to put a trigger warning, but we are seeing farmers taking their lives because of their outstanding debt, and because loan sharks, banks, microfinance institutions are even taking advantage of that kind of income losses. That kind of are taking advantage of their vulnerability to loans and debts, and this is just economically more than what our farmers are equipped to pay off, because these are landless farmers. They are tilling the lands that they do not own, and they are being buried in debt, and they don't have fair prices for their crops. And we have seen similar impacts to humanitarian responders as well, especially last year with a series of typhoons and series of disasters. Local government units, their humanitarian responders are already declaring humanitarian fatigue or response fatigue, and that they are overwhelmed because of the disasters. Now, for us in the Philippines, because we are unfortunately used to encountering disasters, we have already developed our response capacities and humanitarian capacities, and our communities are relatively resilient. But when they are themselves telling the world that they are experiencing burnout, and they are already having response fatigue, now that's a different story. It's like the climate crisis has already exceeded our capacity in that moment. Though I am very much inspired to work with churches and communities for climate resilience, of course, personally, I also feel fear at times. Feel fear because of the shrinking civic spaces in the Philippines, how it is getting harder for humanitarian responders, for environmental defenders such as the churches and NCCP itself, for the context that we are facing right now. As the Philippines is named as the most dangerous country in Asia for environmental defenders because of our human rights situation. So this kind of situation, we are responding to it. We are responding to the climate crisis through our humanitarian response work, through our environmental protection work, and by working with other environmental groups. But there is that fear because the Philippines was named as the most dangerous country for a reason. And that is because it is a dangerous country to fight for our rights. And now it is even a dangerous country to respond to the needs of the climate change affected communities. And it also became a dangerous country for those who would like to protect the environment. This includes not just the activists, not just environmentalists, but also churches, where bishops, priests, pastors, ministers, and church workers like I am have experienced different kinds of threats and violence as we do our work. So this is the everyday life that we are facing in the midst of the climate crisis. And this is something that we address actively, and we face actively, and we find solutions on. But there are limitations, there are barriers and challenges and difficulties that We would like, in this context of our forum, name as our stones that we would like to roll away. But later, maybe we'll have more time to discuss about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And I'll now introduce you to Reverend Dr. Jessica Hetherington. I'm just going to spotlight you. Welcome, Jessica. Now, Jessica is a United Church of Canada minister and eco-theologian who inspires people of faith to live out their discipleship in response to the climate and ecological crisis. She serves on the World Council of Churches Climate Justice and Sustainable Development Commission and attended and wrote about the Biodiversity COP Conference 15. She also writes a newsletter called Faith, Crisis, and Action that we'll put in the link and the chat if you'd like to join. And we'll invite Jessica to share a bit about her context in Ottawa. Thank you, Jessica. And let me know when you'd like me to share the slides that you have.
Sure.
Photos.
You can put them up whenever. I don't remember the order they're in, so put them up whenever you'd like. So It's interesting to actually talk about the context of Canada because so much of my work is international. Sometimes we can forget that Canada is actually warming twice as fast as the global average, and the Arctic is heating up nearly 4 times as fast as the rest of the world. And the implications of this for global sea rise remind us that the climate crisis is indeed global, as our friends here have been saying, and that there's a wide disparity between who is most responsible for the climate crisis and who is most vulnerable at this time to its consequences. And so, but that being said, I'm going to briefly discuss 4 ways in which the climate change is currently impacting Canada, and then discuss our responsibility for taking climate action. So, one of the most intense and damaging impacts of global heating in Canada that we've seen has been, of course, the increase of wildfires across the country. They've been burning hotter and wilder, leading to out-of-control fires and greater destruction of land, flora, and fauna, and putting people at risk. Wildfire smoke, of course, can spread for thousands of kilometers. We've seen times when the air quality index is really poor in our community and the wildfires are many kilometers away. And we also know that the hotter a fire is, the more dangerous particulates are released into the air, causing long-term health effects. Climate change is making wildfires start earlier in the season and burn longer. We're also getting zombie fires where they go underground and stay burning during the winter to then come alive again in the spring. And we actually are now having a phenomenon called fire weather, where the conditions of the wildfires are becoming so extreme that they're creating their own dangerous weather patterns. And we saw this with the devastating Fort McMurray fire in Alberta in 2016. One of the things that makes wildfires more likely to happen, of course, are the increasing heat waves that we're seeing across Canada as well as a result of global heating. And the frequency of heat waves has dramatically increased in Canada. The duration tends to be longer, and we're experiencing more heat domes, which is when the temperatures don't go down at night. And so we don't get that break from the heat that our bodies need. The human body, of course, and it's similar for animals and for plants, can only tolerate so much heat and humidity. And so in British Columbia in 2021, there was a major heat wave at the end of June, beginning of July, and there were recorded 619 heat-related deaths. But that number is probably underreported because there are also heat-related deaths that happen when underlying health conditions are exacerbated by the heat. The next way in which we struggle with climate change here in Canada, of course, is flooding. Warmer air holds more moisture, and so we see more rainfall coming in shorter, intense bursts, leading to flash floods that overwhelm storm sewers and drainage systems in urban areas. In Toronto in 2024, almost 10 centimeters of rain fell in 3 hours, which of course flooded many homes and businesses. And we're seeing flooding from increasingly destructive hurricanes, which can overwhelm an area and lead to flooding. And so with all of these phenomena, we're seeing them happen in places that didn't used to get flooding, didn't used to get wildfires, didn't used to get extended heat waves. So we're seeing these become the norm. And when I say the norm, still being incredibly uncertain to predict. And finally, Canada is experiencing climate change-related droughts, as is the rest of the world. Droughts, particularly in Alberta and Saskatchewan, lead to crop failures. They impede salmon spawning, degrade drinking water, and increase the risk, of course, of waterborne diseases, and limit our capacity to generate hydroelectricity, which, of course, is a clean part of creating clean energy. And droughts worsen the risk of both floods and wildfires. So we find that all of these are interconnected, these various climate-related disasters. Now, not everyone in Canada is affected to the same extent by the consequences of climate change, just as it is around the world. So, for example, here in Canada, most Indigenous communities 80% of majority Indigenous communities are located in fire-prone regions. And more than 40% of wildfire evacuations have been from these communities. Wildfire evacuations. And there are a myriad of other ways in which global heating is negatively impacting Indigenous peoples throughout the country, including impacting their ability to live out their traditional life ways and have their constitutionally protected rights to fish and hunt, etc., to be protected. And of course, this is combined with the environmental racism that has led to the lack of clean drinking water for so many First Nations communities. And environmental racism is also impacting other communities of color in Canada, and it compounds the climate change risks that we see in other places too. And of course, poverty also leads to increased vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. And so, to use one example, access to air conditioning that many of us take for granted during a heat wave is significantly lower. It's significantly lower for people of low income who live alone or don't own their own home to be able to have air conditioning. Now, all of these aspects of climate change in Canada and more are already and will continue to worsen over time, especially for vulnerable and marginalized people in our communities, and will just become worse for everyone. Canadians, of course, have a responsibility to take climate action, both here at home and in the global context. We are a small country in terms of our population. We have about 42 million people, but we are 10th in the world for our total cumulative greenhouse gas emissions to date that have led us to where we are now. So when we look at all the greenhouse gas emissions that we have burned since the Industrial Revolution, we are 10th in the list, and yet we are a tiny country. So that just goes to show how responsible our country is. We are second in the world among the 10 top emitting countries for the amount of per capita emissions we emit. So although it looks like when you look at a chart of like sort of which countries are emitting the most and we're kind of down here, when we look at it per capita, we are number 2. Now, so that shows you that we are disproportionately responsible for the climate crisis, especially compared with the rest of the world. And these numbers of emissions do not include the fossil fuels that we export to other countries. Those fossil fuels burning do not count towards our national emissions. But of course, we are then responsible for the fossil fuels that we export. The reason why our per capita emission rate is so high is mainly because of the oil and gas sector's outsized emissions in our country. And in fact, our per capita emissions are twice as high as China's. So per capita, twice as high as China's. And thus we have a responsibility to both radically reduce our own consumption levels in this country and to push government and industry to end the fossil fuel industry in Canada. We need to keep our oil and gas in the ground. As a rich, developed nation with a high standard of living, we have more ability than many countries to make the transition from fossil fuels. And we still have time to a certain extent, not time to make the change, but time to radically quickly make the change before we start to see even more consequences coming that become harder and harder for us to adapt to and to mitigate against. And so we have the ability as a rich developed nation, and we have the moral responsibility to help fund other countries in making that transition as well. So right now I've just spoken about sort of us as citizens and our country, just as a country, but later when we get into conversation, I can talk more about how this is our Christian responsibility to respond as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, for capturing some of the context here in Canada. I'm now going to add Phyllis and Patricia to our screen so we can see each other. And we'll continue with some questions. And these are that you can each share on and maybe invite each other to comment on. So clearly we've seen this very devastating, clear context that things are not right. Things are not happening in right relation with the earth and with its people and with our call. And it's said that a holistic transformation is needed. What do you see is really at the heart of the crisis? We have heard about the impacts, and we know they're caused by greenhouse gas emissions. And what would you say is at the heart of what's the real question of transformation needed? What's at the heart of this crisis that we're in? And
one of the things that you said, if I may jump in.
Yep, thank you.
In your prayer, you talked about seeing and hearing. And I think there lies the problem. We are people who have eyes, but we don't see. We have ears, but we don't hear. And because it's been said, time and time again, we're living it in almost all of our countries. I don't know any country that's not affected by the climate crises, but yet, we kind of blanket out. One of the devastating things that has taken place in Kenya is the toxic waste dumping, which is a new form of colonialism. And they're bringing their toxic, hazardous waste and dumping it in Africa. We in Kenya alone have an area called a dumping area, Dandora dumping area. And in this area, you have you can see when you drive by this smoke coming from the pile of rubbish, and people are going there trying to salvage whatever they can because of poverty, and seeing that they can get anything that's sellable. But at the end of the day, they're killing themselves because it's toxic waste that's being dumped in Africa. So that's one of the biggest things. But yet, we tend to be, when someone goes into the hospital and if they're sick, they have a sign on the door, if they're nil by mouth. And we tend to be nil by mouth. We don't say anything in spite of what's going on. So I think it's that we need to be very aware that this is very much central to our faith. I tell churches time and time again when I go and speak, even if everyone on this line wrote me a check right now for £1 million and said, here, handle the problem, next year we'll have to come back for another £1 million because, if we don't change our lifestyle and we don't understand that we have a responsibility to change our lifestyle and live simply so that others can simply live.
Yeah, I'll echo some of what Phyllis said, and in my work, I've talked about the problems of worldview, where we've seen humans as separate from the rest of the natural world, and that has been a part of three key pieces. And you spoke to one of them there, Phyllis, mentioning the new forms of colonialism, and at the root of the climate crisis is neoliberal capitalism, white supremacy, and colonialism. The worldview that sees our humans as separate from and superior to the rest of the natural world is the part of the same logic that has allowed for slavery, colonialism, and going in and taking over indigenous places and countries that have all the resources. And until we get to really challenge that, then we won't get anywhere. And within Christianity, particularly in the global north, we are not very comfortable talking about that because most of us don't want to give up our privilege. And, you know, someone like me needs to get really uncomfortable, needs to be willing to radically reduce our consumption levels. Now, I realize it's impossible to do it strictly on an individual level because so much has to happen politically and social realm, but all of that needs to be happening. And the fact of the matter is the consequences we're seeing now are from the fossil fuels that we have already burned, the industrial agriculture that has already happened. What we are doing now, we haven't even begun to see what's coming down the pike. So I think that until we get really, really, really stringent in talking about this, you know, they talk about the Anthropocene, you know, this is the time of the human caused. It's not the Anthropocene because it's not just humans, it's certain humans. It's the Capitalocene. This has been caused by neoliberal capitalism and being held up by white supremacy, patriarchy, etc. So, you know, if we want to really drill down, you know, because we won't get at it because we're going to be up against some really serious forces, some powers and principalities, if you will, here on the planet that have a lot of money to make with what they're doing now.
Yeah, I would also like to add on that because recently in our development consultations in the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, we have been reflecting about how underdevelopment is a new word for sin. And underdevelopment is a new word for sin. Because in today's context, we know that this underdevelopment is systemic, it is structural, and it is also meaning it is intentional. As the Reverend Dr. Jessica said, by the few, not just by the people, but certain people. There exist structures driven by insatiable greed and inspired by profit. And I believe that this is idolatry because this is worship of profit that benefits from when richer nations benefits from the underdevelopment of smaller countries in size and in economy. And I'm seeing this in the Philippines we're seeing this for so long with the extractives industries that are not ours. When richer countries benefit from the extraction of our gold, copper, nickel, and other minerals. And I'm continuing, and with all the resistance of the Filipinos and other small nations, this is still continuing, and this is still increasing and intensifying, in fact, with the world transitioning to clean energy, quote unquote, clean energy. Investments on extractive industries are rising in my country because as we transition to renewable energy, the world needs, there is a higher demand for batteries and solar panels, and those minerals are being harvested from countries like mine. And this kind of injustice, as the richer nations develop the newest kind of electric vehicles, or newest kind or more upgraded version of air conditioning units, our lands, we are being dispossessed by our lands. We are being driven away from our homes and communities. And it exists upon the reality that there is unjust, imbalanced relationships among countries. And that is to point out the imbalance and unjust relationship between the global north and the global south. And this kind of injustice and the oppressive relationships among nations are at the heart of this crisis. We co-found a group called Sangnilikha. It means in English, one creation. This is an ecumenical youth movement for ecological and climate justice. And we have been pondering about the term climate imperialism because it is rooted upon years and centuries of colonialism that is being developed in the face of capitalism. And now when nations and powerful people expand their empire in the form of imperialism, they squash other nations and territories, resources for their comfort and profit, while maintaining brewing underdevelopment in our countries through unjust or neoliberal policies, through unjust agreements. And this is being hammered upon us through militarization and war. And this is the very complex relationship or system that give birth to the climate crisis. But really at the heart, it is sin. It is idolatry even for the worship of profit. And it is time to just allow ourselves to think about that. And for me, the stones that we need to roll away for ourselves is I echo the sentiments of Reverend Dr. Jessica and Reverend Phyllis. It is the fragmentation among us. Because we are already experiencing the climate crisis. Majority of the world is experiencing this, and no one could deny this already. And the majority of the world is the poor, oppressed, marginalized. But we are too fragmented. So the question is, how can we mobilize our churches to link and bridge people with one another in our own countries and with the different countries among those climate affected people? How do we bridge one another, ourselves with one another? And I think this is the ministry of Christ. His ministry is to gather people. And so we need to echo this with our work and with our ministries as churches and church people. Yeah, thank you.
Preach, sister.
So perhaps you've offered us a segue here, Patricia, is this idea of being called to gather and mobilize ourselves. And so I wonder if each of you have any moments where you can had a taste of what that could look like, where people came together who might not otherwise come together, and there were moments that just you, oh, if only we could do more of this. Or are there examples of what that could taste like, what that could look like, and where you've seen moments of that possibility ahead of us?
Certainly. I'm gonna jump right in. I'm just gonna share a slide once again, just to show you. Wait, that's not it. So in the Philippines, like this is a very concrete photo. That's why I am excited to show this to you. We are National Council of Churches in the Philippines. And so as Council of Churches, you know that churches are present everywhere. And with that, we have the strategic position to be present in climate vulnerable communities, disaster affected communities, those that are too far flung to be reached by government services. And with that, when our churches are present in one region, they organize themselves into ecumenical councils. In each province, in each region in the Philippines, there is a regional ecumenical council. So it is a long list. Yeah, and it is present all over the Philippines. So since 2013, there was a Typhoon Haiyan, Super Typhoon Haiyan, which is the largest or strongest typhoon that ever made landfall in the history of mankind. It made its landfall in the Philippines in 2013. And ever since that, we have been pondering, what if these connections, these churches who are already coming together in terms of fellowships, in terms of Christian unity, what if we mobilize them as humanitarian responders, also as environmental defenders? So since 2013, since 2013, this has been the lesson of Typhoon Haiyan, and since I started working in the NCCP, this has been our goal. So slowly we have organized these ecumenical councils and help them build their ecumenical disaster response and management committees. And we have started with the most disaster prone areas and most climate affected areas. And now we are seeing this from those fragmented churches. Some are already coming in fellowship, some have already strong a relationship for Christian unity, and some are already acting in other advocacies. But what we have been doing in the past 9 years or 8 years is this, helping churches reach communities, serve their communities in times of crisis. And this has been the vision of NCCP starting Typhoon Haiyan, and I am very honored to say that we are slowly but surely reaching this goal of linking this and mobilizing churches as a key player in building resilience in grassroots communities. And from disaster response, we are also doing support to climate vulnerable sectors, such as here with the fisher folk. This is our planning session under the tree, and with the indigenous people. And now we are also mobilizing the youth. This is what I shared earlier, the Sangnilikha. This is the ecumenical youth movement for ecological and climate justice in the Philippines. And they have been doing a lot of work in advocacy and public awareness. And I hope, I think this is a very concrete example of how we come together, not just as churches, not just as people of faith, but also as integral parts of communities. And and it is such a powerful effort and initiative if we are able to do this. This just shows the impact that we could have as churches to the most affected communities. And I think I'm gonna stop there before I get too excited. Thank you.
I will jump in and speak a little bit about what that looks like. I just came from a meeting in Uganda that was hosted by the Interreligious Council of Uganda. And we had imams, we had sheikhs, we had people from all the variety of Christianity. And before I even went, I called a person I was just introduced to and said, let's do this together. She was from the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. And we worked together on what we were going to present. And this was, it was focusing on the sustainable, development goals that we will be taking to the African Union will take to the July high-level political forum that will take place at the United Nations. But this was an amazing coming together of people from different faith traditions, understanding that these goals affect us all, no matter where we are. Now, this for me is the starting point, because not only coming together, and I know sometimes you feel nice and cozy and great after a conference, but you go back to your corners and you go back to business as usual. But yet, we see how we're constantly in touch with each other and looking at how do we carry this on and how do we work together. That for me is a movement of God, because in Africa, when the way we work is that we don't say, okay, we're going into a community, and if you're African Independent Church, if you're Anglican, we're going to work with you. If you're Muslim, get over to the side. No, we work with the communities. And I think it's that we have to carry. It's the ethos of saying that this is affecting us all. I began when I first met Lori in a group, and I said, what happens in Vegas does not stay in Vegas. What happens with regards to the climate does not stay in Canada. We know that I think it was in the northern part of Canada where there was not fog, what was it? The smoke that came down to New York City. And it does not just stay in one area, it happens all over. And so therefore, there lies the problem. When we look at the Congo Basin, which covers 6 countries in Africa, which is the biggest rainforest, the largest rainforest in Africa, it's second to the Amazon in the world in terms of its size. And if the trees, if corporations, industries continue to extract the trees in the Congo Basin, we will all feel it. It is not, oh, this is another thing in Africa. It is all of us that will go under, all of us that will feel the effects. And so therefore, I think that it's important for us to collaborate and not just say it's them, but yet it's us. And we will all face this problem. If you don't mind, Lori, putting up that last picture I put out of that woman in Turkana that had the beads on her that came up. Can you put that up for a second? Yeah. This woman inspired me. And I wrote a story and it said that Turkana, the people of Turkana fed me while I went with the Red Cross to be a part of the feeding program, but yet they fed me. Why? At the very end, when food was being given out, the bags were for enough food to feed the people for 3 months. They were quite heavy. As a matter of fact, it was very difficult for one person to lift it up. As this woman was about to leave, she had 2 other women on her side. And what she did was, for me, an amazing thing when she could have just ran away because she had her food. They've been waiting for it for a long time. Her family is not, is hungry. But what she did was she looked to her right and she looked to her left. She picked the bag up of food and put it on the head of the woman to her right. She picked the bag up to the woman on her left and put the bag there. And then she picked up her own bag. Brothers and sisters, it's going to require us to not just say, oh, it's just me, myself, I'm going to deal with the Canadian situation, and that's it. It's being able to look around us, look at the world around us. There are countries that we don't even have represented here. Then they spoke at the United Nations, and they said that if this climate crisis continues in the Pacific Islands, we will go under, we will die, we will no longer exist. But yet we go on as business as usual, almost as if we don't know what's going on. It is important for us to pick up the bag, pick up the burden of our other brothers and sisters in the world and deal with that, help them out, pick up the others and help them out. And then we continue to pick up our bag as well, as we also help to pick up the bag in Canada and put it on your head so that we can work together. So it is a collaborative approach of us dealing with this problem, not in our own areas, but together. Because what goes on in Vegas, what goes on in Canada, what goes on in Nairobi, what goes on in the Philippines affects us all. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And I mean, you mentioned the smoke in New York, which came from the fires in Ontario and Quebec, not too far from here. And I mean, with the glacier ice melting in the Arctic is leading to the islands in the Pacific. So, and one of the things the 2 points I want to make. One is that Indigenous leaders around the world are already leading, and they're already leading. They're on the forefront of climate action, on the forefront of biodiversity protection. And so in this country and elsewhere, it's about, part of what we can be doing is joining in, listening, acknowledging that leadership for someone like myself, stepping aside, because that leadership is already happening. It's bringing it up and being more aware of it. One of the things that I notice in our context of churches is often this is seen the climate change is seen as sort of another social issue, another social justice. It's there along with we need to do this and this and this. And we tend to be a very individualistic society, including as a individual churches. And so my work around saying that Christians are called to a discipleship of climate action is to say that this is, and you both have named it, this is about Jesus Christ. This is about living out the gospel in the world. This is about the fact that the earth community is suffering, and all of God's creation, both human and more than human, are suffering. And that this isn't just another issue that we tack on along with all the other issues that we bring up on Sunday at worship. This is an existential crisis in two levels. One, existence itself is literally at stake. And two, it's a crisis of meaning. Who are we as people? Who are we as people of faith? Who are we as Christians? Who are we as global citizens? And so, we've each got pieces to do that are unique to our country, our context, and then connect with the larger world. So, for example, in Canada, the more work we do, for example, to insist that we keep our oil and gas in the ground will have implications for other parts of the world. But there's just all sorts of ways that we can be tackling this. And like you say, working together, networking, coming across contexts, both with context here, like what are the communities here and there, making those global international connections as well. Well, anyway, hope is another question, but I'll leave it there for now. It's really recognizing that this is not an option, that this is where we're being called. This is where God is calling us now, because this climate crisis is already going to get worse. And our job now is never going to go away. Our job now is to try to prevent as much suffering in the future as we can, to help adapt to now, to help prevent as much suffering as we can now, and then help to prevent more suffering down the line, because catastrophe is coming if we don't radically change. And the radical changes need to come, like, I love that you brought up, Patricia, about clean energy. And you use the air quotes, because there was a brother, a Franciscan brother, when I was in Kenya at a conference, talked about the myth of clean energy. Brother Rodrigo Frei Brazil, and he talked about the myth of clean energy that places mining companies at the forefront. And Canadian mining companies, we are so dirty, so dirty. So. Lots to do.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica and Phyllis and Patricia. So much wisdom, so much passion, so much invitation for action. I just want to open the floor a little bit to see if anyone who's gathered in the room here has any questions or additional any comments you want to make on what you've heard. We'll open up for about 10 minutes to do that. Or anyway, I know we're going to wrap up by 8:30. Just want to offer that possibility. If you'd like to speak, just unmute or use the raise hand function. Perhaps introduce where you are and who you are.
I'm seeing a question from Brad McMurray in the chat. Jessica, you mentioned Canada has a huge greenhouse gas problem, and you mentioned our oil industry, but with oil sands, this isn't just normal oil production, but a much more energy intensive production. Yes, all of it is bad. All of it. Oil sands are just like even worse, right? Like it's trying to get like eking out that last little bit. But absolutely, we need to leave all of it in the ground. Alberta doesn't like it when we say that, but that's what we have to do. It's interesting. I actually have an interesting quote. Global greenhouse, during the economic slowdown that happened after the fall of the USSR between 92 and 2002, global greenhouse gas emissions dropped significantly. They also dropped significantly during after the global financial crash of 2008, and also during the shutdown time of COVID. So there's a very clear connection here between, economic production and greenhouse gas emissions. And the problem there is that people are going to say, oh, well, the GDP needs to be, we got to protect the GDP. And so you can see how there's this inherent contradiction and this need to radically reform our global economic system. So we're no longer measuring well-being and progress and whatnot through economics, right? So yeah.
It looks like we're all just wanting to hear more from our speakers. So before we close, we give an opportunity for each of you to say, if there's something you haven't had a chance to say, I think it could be something that you're taking away from this conversation. And maybe, we had a question maybe about any specific asks that you would want to ask of the audience moving forward. I think there's been some very clear directions given, but there was something you wanted to specifically close with, and then we'll have a few other announcements and then pass over to Juan to close us in a prayer. So some closing words.
I think it's very key for us to understand our own country's policies with regards to the environment, vis-a-vis the rest of the world. I because I think it's important. I also, my plea, my is that we would continually educate our congregations on what is happening and how climate change is not an option. Like Jessica said, it is not something that you say, okay, maybe, but it's something that it's our life. And if we don't do this, our next generations, will suffer even more. And, the consequences of the future generations will be devastating. So I think it's constantly being in the forefront of our congregations, of the people, of our, I don't know how one affects the curricula in our schools, but that's also very key, whether it be from primary school on up to university. Is important for us to understand the multiple effects of climate change, but also, the true story. I know there's some countries who want to erase the history and kind of, hide the bad, as if it didn't happen. We're categorizing certain aspects of history as African American history, Asian history, Middle East history. History is history. It's our history, and how do we never do it again? How do we never repeat it again? It's by understanding it, and understanding the call of God.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to encourage people to really try to step outside of their comfort zone for the climate action that they take. I'm sure everyone who's on this call is doing something already, and I'd like to encourage you to get really uncomfortable and do something that, maybe it's nonviolent civil disobedience. There's some Anglican priest in the UK who's going to prison for her nonviolent climate action. Or it's going and taking your congregation and going and protesting. It's getting really radical in terms of your consumption levels being reduced. Just to really, Dorothy Day, the Catholic worker, used to pray, Lord, what would you have me do? Each morning. And she got up to all sorts of amazing stuff. So I really want to encourage people to really dig down and say, what is the thing that, oh, I couldn't do that. Oh, maybe that's what you need to do. I really want to encourage people to do that and try to really be, those of us who are in places of privilege, or many people in this call, we really need to be willing to get uncomfortable. Physically, emotionally, spiritually uncomfortable, financially uncomfortable.
Yeah, I want to build on that. We need to be uncomfortable. We need to look at ourselves even And I love how it started with the honesty in this all-women panel. And I love the honesty and I love the self-reflection in this conversation. The role of churches. We have, as everyone has already been saying in this conversation, we have the moral responsibility to care for the creation. And this does not mean gardening or planting flowers or putting up trash bins. Those are important, but it's time to get uncomfortable, as Reverend Dr. Jessica said. It's time to talk about the to start the difficult conversations, to really extend ourselves and push ourselves to the boundaries of our of where this moral responsibility to care for the creation would take us. And when we start talking about the climate justice, let's not forget about responsibility and accountability, because I think this is where drastic changes should start when we reflect on that reality that there is a disproportionality in responsibility and accountability when we talk about the climate crisis. Just as the Philippines have the least contributions, but we are one of the most affected, just as in Asia, other countries in Asia Pacific and Africa. And we need to really hold our governments accountable. It's funny that Reverend Dr. Jessica said about the mining operations and mining investments, because I was just about to highlight one of the largest open pit mining operations in the Philippines is also it's also Canadian Australian Mining Corporation, and you could look that up. The Oceana Gold Mining Corporation. It has divided and destroyed communities of people. It has flattened mountains to the ground, and they are not being held accountable in my country because we have weak mining regulations. And we need to take it up upon ourselves. I am talking to the churches in Canada. You are in strategic position to lobby and advocate for environmental protection, for stronger climate actions, stronger climate investments, and support to climate-affected nations and peoples and communities. You are in that strategic position. And I want to encourage you to reflect on that position, that privilege to act drastically for climate justice. And while you do that reflection, I invite you to look at the situation in the most affected countries. I invite you to look at the situation in the Philippines, because it is bad. Look at us, stand with us by visiting the Philippines, holding pilgrimages, campaign with us, exposure visits, and we just have to foster that kind of international solidarity. And this is just about building that kind of global north, global south cooperation. As the Philippines, we are also building bridges with the global south and most climate affected countries. And that is our role as churches. We unite the most affected people and we act as bridges and we invite people to gather together. I think at the end of the day, it's all about that. It's all about how we replicate or how we live out Christ's ministry in the context of the day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I just so appreciate each of your contributions, and together the bigger picture and the energy. And I think it reminds us how precious it is that we're in a strategic position, Patricia, and particularly because we are part of networks. This evening is a collaboration of the NCCP and OAIC and the United Church. because as the United Church, we do have a commitment to connecting with partners globally, bilaterally, individually with particular partners, and also in global convenings like the World Council of Churches and such entities like that. So I just really appreciate this evening and this opportunity to live that out. And I think as Phyllis calls us to, is we don't just go away into our corners, but the three of us, we'll talk again internally as staff as how we continue to work our climate advocacy pieces together, and to know as where you folks, where you are in churches. I'm getting some feedback, to feel that you are part of this story too. And a lot of the work of this, it happens locally. It happens in very specific communities where you live, where we are. And when we come together, we can feel that bigger picture. But action doesn't happen globally. It happens in a specific place, in a specific moment, a specific context. And each of us is in one of those places. And so do feel that the General Council Office and regional staff are wanting to support you in your efforts where you are. And one of the efforts is that we've come together as churches and faith communities to form a national coalition called For the Love of Creation. And that is why this week during Earth Week, we're encouraging people to take action and to then share that, because I think it's those moments that then inspire us to learn what others are doing and continue to keep the climate action as integral to what we do. So do feel that all of us gathered here are here to support each other. And in a follow-up email, I'll include the resources that are linked, have been shared in the chat, so that we can continue to stay in touch. So thank you. And I will now invite my colleague Juan, who is a global partnership coordinator specifically linked to partners in Asia, a colleague of mine, and he will close us with a prayer.
Yes, and thank you, Lori. Thank you, Phyllis, Jessica, and Patricia. And thank you all of you for joining us tonight. And thank you for your donations to the Mission and Service Fund, which makes global partnership possible. So thank you very much. And let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for the love of creation, the beauty, the magnificence, and all the ways in which your creation has inspired us and fed us and inspired in its beauty. Oh God, we are also reminded that the creation is hurting with too much greenhouse gases, too much pollution, and too much of everything. Oh God, roll away the stones of greed, roll away the stones of complacency, roll away the stones of fear. Unite us in your love, inspire us to greater connectedness and wholeness of creation and one another, and guide us so that we may embrace the costliness of discipleship in which you call us to. May you journey with us towards wholeness, for sustainability, and for healing. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. And thank you, everyone. And as you sign off, feel free to unmute. And I'm not rushing you to leave, but I'm just saying as you leave, feel free to unmute and say good night or good morning or whatever, or go well, be well, as we're all in different spaces. But thank you so much for spending this time together this evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patricia and Phyllis. That was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful information.
Thank you all.
God bless you all.